It's 5 o'clock in London, it's midday in New York, 1 a.m. in Hong Kong, 4 a.m. in Sydney, 9 a.m. in San Francisco, and 11:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Patrick L. Young. The IPO-VID live stream, Series 23, Episode 3, that's episode number 135 in the aggregate, starts here. And what a great start to Women's History Month this week on our social media. We're actually profiling Adina Friedman, but a great start. March the 1st, Bonnie Chan made history as the first female CEO of the Hong Kong Exchanges Group. Farewell to Nicholas Agazin, who signed off with the second best annual profits in the Hong Kong Exchanges Group history. I reckon Bonnie Chan is poised for one of the biggest upswings in Hong Kong Exchanges history, by the way, as the renminbi yield curve, trading, and the vast power of a two-way connect really takes off in the next upspring. Very, very exciting times into that upswing. Meanwhile, back in Europe, well, if only there was any sort of an upswing whatsoever. The European Commission is whining about its own CCP clearing deal, where the Brussels blob backed down on rendering the euro a non-deliverable currency through protectionism because the banks, the clearing houses, the exchanges, apart from those with a certain degree of self-interest, like you, Deutsche Börse, all said it was a really, really, really bad idea. Nonetheless, that hasn't stopped a degree of angst amongst those in Brussels who feel that it's just unreasonable that business shouldn't flow naturally to the common turn of Brussels. Meanwhile, in fact, things are getting so bad, even the Financial Times has begun critiquing the sclerotic disaster area of European markets and the non-event which is Capital Markets Union, which we've been waiting for more than a decade, and absolutely nobody can put into any sort of coherent practice across what is now the 27 nations of the European Union after the UK opted out. The Brussels Bugle itself is out there saying we're going in the wrong direction. Naturally, they're prescribing the wrong solution, but at least it points out that the EU has a high modicum of failure. Our guest today, joining us for the third time, ladies and gentlemen. Previously, you saw him in IPO episode number 104 in Defence of Capitalism. In episode 116, he was talking about the wealth elite, and both of those are gripping editions that you will want to get back to. Today, we have got Rainer Zitelmann, and he's going to be talking to us about Unbreakable Spirit. Let me just cut in at the moment. I'm being told by our tech team that we have a problem today, ladies and gentlemen. Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, Facebook, whatever it's called, it's also well known, I think, as the organization which is accused of more crimes in the United Kingdom than any other platform. That's direct from the UK's own police statistics. Anyway, Metabook, Facebook, whatever you want to call it, it's down at the moment in much of the world, so we're not going live on that. So you're only going to be able to see this as a recording. We are, however, live right now, I do believe, on no less than LinkedIn, Twitter for the first time we're going live there, and YouTube. Back to our guest. Rainer Zitelmann is a German historian, sociologist, and multiple best-selling author whose 26 books, actually it might be 27 now, I'm not quite sure, include In Defence of Capitalism. His books have been translated into 30 languages around the world with his copious quantity of op-eds, and he has been twice our guest on IPO-VID, as I mentioned before. Actually, also check out at the moment, Rainer has a fantastic series in City AM. You can get that at cityam.com, edited by the great Andy Sylvester, and they've been talking there all about the interesting facets of the new edition of Capitalism, his latest book, which has been out recently, alongside the one we're going to be talking about today. An Ipsos Mori poll in 2021 revealed that 51% of Americans could not name a single successful person with a disability. In this week's IPO-VID, Rainer is going to be discussing his latest book, Unbreakable Spirit, discussing a wealth of incredible talent, all of which flourished with, or frankly in spite of, disability. So here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Rainer, greetings. Great to see you back again. Where in the world are you today?
I'm in Berlin, and it's now 6 p.m. here in Berlin. Yes, and today we had Facebook is down, but not here. But Tesla is down here, Elon Musk Tesla, because there was a terrorist attack today. They have no electricity, so they have no electricity and they can't produce their electric cars because left-wing anti-capitalist terrorists attacked it. And so these people are really crazy. First, they tell everyone don't drive combustion engines because of the climate change problems. And then if people start to who want to drive electric vehicles, they have terrorist attacks against this. This is what happens here. So Facebook is not down, but Twitter works here, but Elon Musk Tesla doesn't work here in Berlin.
That's quite incredible altogether. So everybody's rushing into the garage and going, Tesla, Tesla, Tesla. Oh no, that's not going to work. I'll take out my Trabant instead, which emits about 7,000 times more emissions. I mean, it was one of the most polluting cars of all time, despite the fact it only had like a 500 or 600 cc engine.
Yes, but do you know the story? Guess, what do you think? How long did you have to wait for that such a Trabant, Trabi in East Germany? What do you guess?
If I remember correctly, it was something like 12 to 14 years or some ridiculous.
Between 12 and a half and 17 years, you had to wait to get the worst car in the world.
Yes, it reminds me of that absolutely fantastic Ronald Reagan joke where Reagan talks about the guy who's ordering his Trabant, and he said, can you tell me exactly what day it will be available on? And they tell him whatever it's going to be 15 years later. They give him a precise day, and they say, so we'll bring that round to you in the morning. And he says, no, don't bring it around in the morning because the plumber is coming that day.
Yes. The great joke.
It's fantastic. It's a fantastic joke, a brilliant joke from a time when markets were truly championed by our politicians. So tell me, I mean, just briefly, I mentioned the fact you've got 2 books at the moment that are out, that are new. So one of them is a new edition, I do believe. Is that right? The Power of Capitalism you've got out in a new edition right now?
Yes, to be honest, it's 3 books in English. The one is Unbreakable Spirit. We will start with this. Then there's a brand new edition of Power of Capitalism. And here I'm very proud. This will be published in 2 weeks. Maybe we can discuss it later.
Excellent.
How nations escape poverty. This is, by the way, look how they made it. It's really how it looks. It's
beautiful.
I have 80 different books here, 90 now in different languages. But this is the most beautiful book here. How
That's
nations
gorgeous.
escape poverty.
Quite beautiful altogether. Very nice piece of production altogether. And so who produced that to such a high standard?
This is Encounter Publishing. I always wanted to publish a book with them in the United States, but I had no contact, and I sent them an email, but without success. But when I've been in New York City last time, a friend of mine told me he knows the owner, and then I met him. And sometimes this makes a difference, whether you only have contact with email or whether you speak to people in person. And this was the start, and then they made the decision to publish this book.
That's fabulous altogether. Yes, indeed. The world of publishing is a many splendored and rather obscure cloak and dagger organization in terms of how you get in there in order to speak to publishers in the first place. It's always quite funny. So tell me, you've got that book that's coming out in a couple of weeks' time. Love to talk about that more. In fact, I think it's probably the subject of a whole discussion in its own right. But today, we're here to talk about Unbreakable Spirit. So what drove you to the idea of writing this book?
So this is a book about successful disabled people, 20 successful disabled people. And it was a personal experience. Few years ago, I had an appointment with my doctor, and he told me that I have a serious eye disease and an issue with my eyes. And it was a surprise because usually I had very, very good eyes, much better than the average. And so it came to me as a surprise, and I didn't know anything about this disease. And I asked him what can happen, and he told me the worst thing that can happen is that you can never read any book in your life, not even with the best classes. And of course, this was a kind of shock because reading is so important for me. And and I asked him about a surgery, and I said, yes, you can have a surgery, but it's 30% that it will become better, 30% that it will stay the same, and 30% that it will become worse. And so he told me, I will not recommend you this time, only when it goes more down. And of course, after this, I consulted other professors, doctors, and yes, he was right. This is what can happen. And what I did then, I started to read books about blind people, several books about blind people, and I met a successful entrepreneur who's blind. Not that I thought that I would become blind, but I wanted to know more about this without this personal experience that I had an issue with my eyes. I wouldn't be interested in this topic, but so I started to read books. For example, one book about a person, I will tell you a few words about him, and then you can guess who it is. This is someone who was born in 1930 in the United States, black. And of course, in the 30s, to be black in the United States was a much bigger problem as it is today. And he was born in one of the poorest neighborhoods of his hometown. He never met his father. His mother died when she was 31 years old. His brother died in front of his eyes when he was 6 years old. And when he was 7 years old, he became blind. Do you know who he is, about whom I'm talking?
No, straight off the top of my head, I'm not sure anyone does at this juncture.
Yes, but everyone knows him. This is the interesting.
Yes.
Because it's Ray Charles.
Ray Charles.
It's Ray Charles.
Oh my goodness.
According to the official Billboard list, he's the most successful male singer in history, even more successful than John Lennon, Paul McCartney, or Michael Jackson. He's the number one for male singers. And he earned hundreds of millions, even in the 50s or in the 60s. I think today it would be billions and billions. He was very famous. And by the way, he had a lot of beautiful women. Of course, he couldn't see them because he was blind. But he was so successful. And this was one of the books that inspired me, because you know this saying, usually some people say the most important thing in life is being healthy. And I said it also before, but after reading more and more about successful disabled people, I changed my mind. Of course, it's important. Health is important, but it's not the most important thing. If you, for example, could change, or you could make a decision whether you want to be maybe an ordinary taxi driver with a frustrating life, with a woman at his with a wife at his home who makes only problems. He has problems to pay his rents and all these things, but he's healthy. And on the other hand, I tell you, okay, you can be as successful, as rich, and have as many beautiful women as Ray Charles. But you'll be blind. I think I would decide for the life of Ray Charles. And it's only one example. So this was one. I had a personal reason to write this book. And after I read the books about blind people, I read about other people with. I have in my book with no arms or no legs and no arms, or deaf or bind to the wheelchair or whatever. But I had another reason. And this is because I hate this victimhood mentality. Today, so many young people want to be a victim. I'm a victim of capitalism. I'm a victim of sexism. I'm a victim of racism and whatever. And I hate this victim mentality. To come back to Ray Charles, he never felt himself as a victim of anything. He had also problems in his life. For a couple of years, he took drugs, heroin. And one day, he asked him to tell them the name of his drug dealer. But he refused to. And interesting what he said. He said, no, I will not tell you the name of the drug dealer, because it was not the fault of the drug dealer. And it was not because I was black. It was not because I was poor. It was not because I was blind. It was only my own decision. So you see, this is the absolute opposite of this victimhood mentality. And I wanted to analyze the life of these people who became so successful in spite of all of their problems. And I wanted to analyze what can we learn from these people, because I thought if you have a similar mindset, as for example, this is the man on the cover of the book. This is Eric Weinmeier, and he's American. I spoke with him. He's blind, but he was the first blind man to climb the Mount Everest. And he didn't not only climb the Mount Everest, but the 7 summits, so the 7 highest mountains on 7 continents, blind. Imagine if you would have the same mindset, spirit, as he has, this unbreakable spirit, what could you achieve in life?
It's fascinating altogether. And you mentioned all this sort of spirit of victimhood. So did you find that amongst the people that you profiled for the books, that any of them really did identify as victims at some stage, or had they all managed to very quickly shrug off and just get on with their lives?
No one did. Maybe for some years, of course, if you have this issue, sometimes it takes some years to get the right attitude. But I tell you an example from today. He's a friend of mine. He's born with no arms. His name is Felix Gliese. He's young. He's 30 years old, but he's one of the best hornists in the world. And to play this music instrument, horn, usually you have to use your arms, but he has no arms. And he has no arms, and he found his own. He invited his own technique, because everyone told him it's not possible. You will never be a professional. And today he's one of the best. He's traveling all over the world, in Asia and Japan, in the United States, and has a lot of very successful CDs. And he told me, if you ever started to blame external circumstances or with crazy questions, why did it happen to me? And I'm so sorry about me. If you ever started with this, you will see it will not change your situation. It will make only your situation worse. So stop asking yourself this crazy question, why did it happen to me? And even some of these people managed it to turn the negative thing, their disability, in something positive. For example, Beethoven. Beethoven, he was almost deaf when he composed some of his biggest, most famous symphonies, like the Ninth Symphony. He was almost deaf, and maybe without this deafness, I don't know. I don't know whether he would be so successful. And now these are so amazing stories. But the most interesting story in my book was about a gallerist, one of the most successful gallerists in Germany. His name is Johann König, and he opened his first gallery when he was almost blind. Can you imagine this?
Quite incredible altogether. It sounds like some sort of a joke involving an Irishman, I have to say. It's quite amazing that he would manage to go into the art business when he was going blind. So how did he succeed? How did he get on?
Yes, he saw a little bit, like between 10%. Later he had some surgeries and he saw 30%. But last time I met him 3 weeks ago, now it's down again with only 10%. But yes, you can read more and more and more in my book. This was a different kind of art with some kind of experiments and maybe not so much pictures and so. But in the end, even in his gallery, he had a lot of pictures and was very successful. Now he had some problems in the last years, but not because of being blind, but because of a very crazy so-called Me Too story. That, but this is another thing. And yes, I think I admire these people so much because you and me, we have 2 arms, 2 legs. We are not blind, we are not deaf, but sometimes we think, it's so difficult and this and that. But think about Stephen Hawking. This is another one, the famous physics. In the end, he was not only to communicate with his electronic system, and he wrote a bestseller. And I had a contact with a book author, a few weeks ago, and she gave me the first version of her next book, and I told her, no, sorry, you can't publish it like this. You have to change a lot of things. And I know how it is for an author if someone tells you have to change a lot of things. But then I told her, here, think about Stephen Hawking. He had to change so many things in his book. His editor told him, change it, and he did it. And for him, it was so much more complicated because he couldn't use a personal computer or anything else. He had to develop a special system with his eye contact, only letter by letter, so it was very, very slow. But he saw the positive things. What he said one time, I recommend to every person with disabilities not to focus on the things that you cannot do, but focus on the things you can do. And he said that it was even an advantage for him that he could focus 100% on his scientific research, and he didn't have to spend hours and hours in boring meetings at the university or giving lectures to students. So he could focus only on his research, and so even he saw this negative thing as something positive. Or another example, have you heard about Nick Vujicic? Do you know his name?
He was someone I had not heard of until I started reading your book. So tell us a little bit about him, because he's a really inspiring figure.
Yes, sir. I can recommend to everyone, please Google his name, Nick Vujicic. You can find videos on YouTube. He's born with no arms and no legs. And it is a heartbreaking story. His father also wrote a book, and there were some pages. I had even tears in my eyes when I read it, because it was about his birth, when his mother gave birth to him, and his father was with her, and he saw that someone was not okay. He saw it, that maybe an arm was not at his shoulders. And then he spoke with the doctor, and he said, I saw something, there's something not okay. I think an arm is missing. The doctor said, no. The problem is he has no arms and no legs. And his mother, she refused to see him for the first week. And you can imagine how hard it was for them. And the first years of his life were so hard. Sometimes he thought about committing suicide. Not the first, I have to correct myself, not the first years, because the first years he didn't see the difference. He know it only as it is with no legs and no arms. But later, when he became a little bit older and started to become a teenager, and of course he wanted to have a girlfriend, and all his other people at school, students had then girlfriends, and he not. And then it was a very frustrating time, and even he thought sometimes about committing suicide. But then he made experience. He was in a Christian group, and everyone had to speak, like to give a short speech, and he spoke about his life and experience. And he saw that people started to cry, and he saw that he moved something, because he didn't have to explain to anyone that it was really difficult for him in life. If you see someone in front of you with no legs and no arms, you don't have to explain to him that you had a lot of challenges and difficult time. And then he saw that he had the talent to speak. And he set himself this goal to be a motivational speaker. And today he's so successful. He was in 17 countries, more than 70 countries, but he met statesmen and prime ministers in 17 countries all over the world. He reached millions and millions of people all over the world with his lectures and, of course, his videos. And he wrote very successful books. And what is unbelievable, you can, if you Google him on the internet, you can see he has a very beautiful wife and he has 4 children. A very beautiful wife and 4 children. He has no legs, no arms, and he's so successful. And if you hear about people like him, I think that gives us food of thought. We have our little problems. Today you had some technical problems there, and so okay, I had my own problems. But hey, what are these problems? I think sometimes we should be thankful, not to be. I think it's important to have the correct mixture between being thankful on the one hand, but not being, satisfied with everything that you have. You have to embrace the power of dissatisfaction. That there's a gap between your goals and your situation. I call it the productive kind of dissatisfaction. But on the other hand, be thankful. When was it last time that you thanked God or whoever that you have 2 arms and 2 legs and that you are not blind? And by the way, I started to tell you about my issues with my eyes. In the meantime, I had a surgery. I had 2 surgeries. It's much, much better now. With my right eye, I can read very good. It's like 160% right now. I can see good far with my right eye, only close. But with my other eye, I can watch very good far, but not so good close. So it's great today. You see, I don't have to wear glasses. Of course, if I read books, I have to wear glasses. But I remember the doctor told me it will take a couple of months after it's going better with your eyes. And then it was the Christmas Eve. And my girlfriend was with me and she wrote me a nice card with, some beautiful sentences or words for Christmas. And I forgot that I had no glasses and I started to read it. And then, what happened right now? You could read it without glasses. And this was so amazing experience, and I'm very thankful for this. And so I think, yes, don't be happy with all of your life. You have to have this power of dissatisfaction. But on the other hand, be thankful for this and start to think in a different way about disabled people. I was 2 years ago at the Freedom Fest in the United States. This is the biggest libertarian event. I will be there this year again in Las Vegas. And 2 years ago, I had my first film, Live Behind the Berlin Wall, and I get an award. And then there was this. I showed the film to the people at the film festival, and there was one disabled person sitting in the first row. Later, I learned he's only less than 1 meter and 20, and I saw no one was communicating with him, but I started conversation with him, and I learned that he's a very smart economist, and he told me I had some experience that other people didn't have, and so I learned something that other economists do not know.
Fascinating altogether. And it's quite incredible how you see all of these people with their unbreakable spirits in every possible sense. Let me move the conversation away and give you a chance to have a little drink to catch up. You've been talking a lot there, Rainer. Let's go to this week's book of the week. We've got from John Bogle, who was the man behind Vanguard originally, The Little Book of Common Sense Investing. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a book of the week. Anybody can learn what our book of the week is going to be by signing up at exchangeinvest.com for the EI weekend. That's our free newsletter where we delve into more macro topics of readership, including, of course, the great op-eds that are written by the likes of Rainer Zitelmann, our guest today, discussing Unbreakable Spirit. So The Little Book of Common Sense Investing is the way to guarantee your fair share of stock market returns. Little books, but it's big profits, they always say. It reveals John Bogle's key to getting more out of investing, low-cost index funds. And of course, these are from people who championed the ETF, the Exchange and Traded Fund altogether. Bogle was, of course, the founder and longtime CEO of the Vanguard Group, and as such, his ETFs stand testament today to his approach towards common sense investing. Don't forget, if you want to learn more about what's going on in the world of exchanges, then equally you can, of course, delve into our daily newsletter, Exchange Invest. You can sign up to that at exchangeinvest.com. We're offering a free month's trial today for those of you who are interested. Thereafter, it's an incredibly reasonably priced $379 per annum to get the exchange of information and put you on a par with the finest minds in the bourse business worldwide. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got a chance, hit that like button for us. We'd really appreciate that. Something that gives us a little bit of assistance with the AI, the artificial intelligence that's looking through all of these different feeds. And of course, once again, apologies, we're not coming to you live on Facebook, but I'm delighted to see our viewers on X, Twitter, as it used to be known, as we make our first experiment with going live there. Who knows, we might come back in the future and stay with Twitter. If you've got a comment or a question for Rainer, then do by all means, please send it over now. I'd like to say thank you very much to Woman on It. We were talking about Trabants at the start of the show as a possible substitute for Tesla, thanks to the latest lunacy of the eco-terrorists of Berlin. Yes, we used to call Trabant a soapbox in Poland, says Beata, due to the body structure. Here's to an unbreakable spirit. And of course, I think famously the Trabant was not only a great pest when it was driving, thanks to the kind of plastic that it was made of, it was almost impossible to get it to biodegrade as well. It had a half-life about the same sort of length as the average nuclear power plant, as I seem to recall. Now, Rainer, you picked these 20 people. As a matter of interest, how did you come to decide on this entire list? I mean, let's just break it down for a second. Some of them are very famous people from history. You mentioned Ludwig van Beethoven and that incredible struggle. It's incredible to think that Beethoven must have been unable to actually hear people singing the chorus from the Ode to Joy in the course of the Ninth Symphony. It's amazing when you look at how beautiful the music was. You mentioned Ray Charles. You mentioned all sorts of other people. How did you come to this fascinating mix of 20 people with unbreakable spirit?
Of course, some of them almost everyone knows, like Ray Charles, or Stephen Hawking, Stevie Wonder. But there were also some others. I never heard about them. It was a result from my research. For example, maybe the most fascinating one was James Holman. They called him the blind traveler. He was British, and he lived now more than 200 years ago, and he traveled all over the world in a total of 400,000 kilometers, what is more than the distance to the moon. And he was everywhere in Siberia, in Africa, and he traveled all over the world. He had not much money. He was blind, and it's amazing to read his books about his experience, how he did it. Or another one was one of the first scientific historian in the United States, Prescott. And because I'm also a historian, of course, this was interesting for me. And he was also almost blind, and sometimes he could read only for a couple of minutes or for a half hour. And most of the day, he listened. He had another person who read the books for him aloud, and he was sitting there on his chair and listening to him. And it was also difficult to write for these people. Don't forget, this was not the time when you had personal computers and all this. Today, it's really not so difficult for people who are blind. If I have a friend, he's blind, and if I write him an email, he has these programs. They read all those emails, and they can they can dictate their answers. But this time it was very difficult even to write, and so it was a kind of research to learn more, so find more examples of disabled people. And yes, it was really fascinating for me. And I will come back how I started with this victimhood mentality. I think the people who have this victimhood mentality, they harm themselves, because you can't be successful if you feel yourself like a victim. You can't be successful if you blame external circumstances, or if you blame other people for not being successful. You remember we had this conversation about my second doctoral dissertation, The Wealth Elite. And one of the results of my interviews with 45 very successful entrepreneurs and investors was that they never blamed other people for their setbacks, crises. And this is so very important that you learn to take responsibility not only for your success or also for your failure, and stop blaming other people, stop blaming external circumstances. And now I will add something. This is not only true for individuals. This is also true for nations. I mentioned in the beginning of our interview here my new book, How Nations Escape Poverty. And this is a book about Poland and Vietnam. And Vietnam is a perfect example. They had so many wars, not only with the United States, because before there was the war with the United States, there was the war with France, and war with Japan, and later with China. I think they had a war with half of the members of the United States or United Nations Security Council. And when I've been there in Vietnam, I thought maybe that they have negative attitude toward the United States. I would understand it, because there were 10 times more explosive and bombs on Vietnam than on Germany in the Second World War. And almost everything was destroyed by the war. And after the war, they implemented this crazy socialist planned economy. Of course, this planned economy destroyed everything that was not destroyed by the war. And in 1990, Vietnam was the poorest country in the world, poorer than all African countries. The GDP per capita was less than $100. So this was even behind Somalia. And now, but what's interesting and what is similar to this disabled people, in this situation, they could blame other countries. They could blame the United States or China or France or Japan or almost everyone for their situation. But no, they didn't do it. They saw that it was their own mistake to implant this crazy socialist planned economy. And they started the end of the 80s with free market reforms. They introduced private property, opened the economy for foreign investors. And today it's amazing. It's one of the, I saw the index of economic freedom a couple of days ago. And what is bad news? the index of economic freedom, almost everywhere in the world, goes down right now. The United States had the worst ranking since they started the index in 1995, but Vietnam jumped 13 ranks in the ranking, and why is that? Because they didn't blame other countries or for their situation. This is what African countries do. They tell you all the time, oh, we are the victims of colonialism and slavery and all this stuff. And this is the reason for our poverty. And now we need more development aid. In the end, all this development aid only goes in the pocket of corrupt governments in these African countries. But Vietnam didn't become successful with development aid, but with capitalism, with free market reforms. And, to bring this together with the disabled people, the lesson is it's the same for individuals and for countries. Stop blaming other people. If you blame other countries, like a lot of African countries do for your situation, if you blame other people, or I couldn't succeed in the university, the professor didn't like me, I'm so sorry about myself, my boss didn't like me later, so I couldn't succeed, and I'm a victim of all this racism, this sexism, and capitalism, all this stuff. No, you will never be successful with this attitude. And this is the lesson for countries and for individuals.
It's a very, very interesting lesson, and we've got a correspondent from Annberg here. Hello, and lovely to see you again, Anne. A truly uplifting and inspiring interview, and bravo for your stance on victimhood, Rainer, says Annberg, herself a previous IPO-VID guest a number of weeks ago talking about commodities. Thank you very, very much, Anne, for your input. One of the things which struck me about your book, well, actually two things struck me about your book. One was how many people had succeeded in the arts, and particularly music, after their disabilities. And obviously we've got, trying to name those that we haven't mentioned so far, there's Vincent van Gogh, for example, who you profiled, and yes, many other very, very interesting figures there and thereabout, like Andrea Bocelli. You mentioned Stevie Wonder beforehand, Michael J. Fox, etc. And I think I was particularly struck, obviously we talked about Beethoven, and there are so many other musicians alongside Felix Kleiser you could have mentioned, like Wittgenstein, the famous one-armed pianist who was injured in the First World War and yet came back to great concert renown, inspiring all manner of different people. So the arts had a huge number of people in your book, and this is probably volume 1 of a series. I was very interested in how some people created incredible happiness as a result of their own issues in life. And one person who struck me there was a story I didn't know whatsoever. We all know about teddy bears. We all know about some of the great and most prestigious names in teddy bears. And I suppose the woman who created the most famous German teddy bear mark, or at least teddy bear mark in the German-speaking world, Margarete Stieff. I mean, that was a very, very interesting story about her overcoming obstacles.
Yes, absolutely. And she's, she's a woman, female, but she was not any kind of feminist fighting for women's right. No, she was bound on the wheelchair. She couldn't. She had a disease when she was polio, when she was a child, and so she was bound on the wheelchair. But yes, she became so successful, not only in Europe, but especially in the United States with the teddy bears. And she became very rich and very successful. And this is also, yes, to be honest, I was looking for more stories from successful entrepreneurs. And I'm sure that there are more successful entrepreneurs who are disabled, but I didn't find so much. It's correct. There were more people from the arts, like we didn't mention him, Bocelli. I like his music, this Italian. He was not only successful in popular music, but also in the classical music with the opera. And you're correct. These are more people from the arts, and I would be happy if other people write similar books, because of course there are much more people all over the world, successful people who are disabled. These are only 20 in my books, and I would be very happy to read more books. But I have to add something what was disappointing for me. Some of my books are very successful, and I sold a lot of copies. Not with this book. Not with this book. It was not successful, to be honest, in Germany. I sold not as many books as from, for example, my other books, like The Psychology of the Super Rich, or another book, or Dare to Be Different and Grow Rich, or The Power of Capitalism. I sold much more books. And I wonder why, because the people who read the book, they told me, it's your best book. It's so motivation. It gives me so much motivation. It inspired me. But maybe we have, to be honest, if I wouldn't have this own, disease, this experience with my eyes, maybe I would have never been interested in disabled people. And maybe it's something like to speak about dying or cancer or so. We want to avoid these things. But I wrote this book not only for disabled people. Of course, I hope that some parents of disabled people will read this book, and that will give them power, and that I'm sure. And some people told me, disabled people read the book, that the book gave them something. But I think it's especially, I wrote it for people who are not disabled. There was one story about a famous athletic runner. She was part in the Olympic Games, and when she was at school, she was also almost blind. She said, I wondered always why all these other people, for them it's so easy to read and all this. What was so difficult for me? Why are they so lazy sometimes? She couldn't understand it. And sometimes you have to ask yourself. This is also, I think, a very important question everyone has to ask yourself. If you are successful, you're successful, for example, and I'm successful, yes, but isn't it possible to be much more successful in life? In the end of your life, maybe you will ask yourself the question, have I done everything that I could do to be so successful? Or if I would adapt this attitude from the people in this book, wouldn't it be possible for me to be even much, much more successful than I was? I think this is sometimes I think about the end of our life. If you think back in your life, and I think everyone has some talents and potential, and we ask ourselves sometimes, why are we here, and what is the purpose of life? I think the purpose of life is to see what are my talents, and then I think everyone has any kind of talent, but then it's not enough to having a talent. Of course, you have to do something, and it's not only about hard working. It's yes, working is also important, of course, not being lazy, but it's also about how big are the goals that you set for yourself. I come back to this Eric Weinmeier. After he climbed the Mount Everest, this was not enough for him. He set himself the next goal, to climb the 7 summits. And I think this is also something that is so important, that you have goals in your life, to set yourself big goals. I'm a big fan of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't know whether you saw his latest movie on Netflix. It's about his... I forgot the title. Have you seen it from Arnold?
No, I have not actually seen it.
You should see it. It's so great. I read his autobiography, Total Recall. What is a great book I can recommend. I think I read all the biographies about him because I follow his life since decades. But this film gives you so much inspiration. Also, someone who came from a small village in Austria, and he had a difficult childhood with a father who was a policeman, and sometimes he was very, very hard with his wife and also with his children. But then he made his way to when he was 20 years old to go to the United States, and he spoke almost no word English, and he had the goal of being the biggest bodybuilder in the world. And people told him, it's a crazy idea. What is bodybuilding? But this was only his first goal. Then his next goal was being one of the most successful movie stars, action stars. And everyone told him, forget it. No one want to see someone with a body like you. This was in the 80s. Today it's people like Dustin Hoffman. This Hercules movies, they were in the 50s. No one want to see someone with this big, huge muscles. And you have this strange accent. He had a much... his accent was much more... I know I have this strong German accent, but his accent was much, much stronger than even mine. People don't forget it. You have this strange accent. People have problems to understand you, and no one can pronounce your name. And by the way, do you know when was the last European to be successful in Hollywood? So forget it. And his first movies were not successful. I think he got an award for one of the 100 worst movies ever made. This was with his Hercules in New York. But he didn't give up, and he learned so much, and he had his big goals. And if you see it on Netflix, this movie about his life, the most important thing is always set himself big goals. And then people, when he succeeded in the movies, he with his film Twins, he made $30 million only with his film Twins. And it was not about muscles and like an action star, it was a comedy. And after this, he wanted to be a politician, and he became, governor of California, what was the 8th biggest economy at this time, 2 times. And for me, stories from people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was, of course, not disabled, but he came from difficult family background and a small village in Austria. And if you hear stories from people like this, the longer I think about it, I think the most important thing for your life is how big are your goals? How big are your goals? I think this makes a big difference. And I hope after this interview, everyone will make a little pause and think, okay, I have big goals, but what would be if I have even much bigger goals? Wouldn't it be possible? If you can try, and if you some people have maybe they have fear to fail, but if you don't try, you even fail. If you try, you have a chance or possibility. It's the same if you see a very beautiful woman on the street. I go there and talk to her. Some people are afraid. What can happen? No, nothing bad can happen. But if you don't do it, she will not come to you.
Absolutely nothing bad can happen of this. I did that once, and I ended up married. And there you go. Oh, that's great. What happens. So that's the perfect sort of thing that can happen to you in these sorts of scenarios. So, I mean, look, big goals, big attitude. You've really got to get out there and not be a victim. That's some of the fantastic things about the unbreakable spirit of humanity that you've demonstrated in this book. So do tell me in the last couple of minutes we have left. I mean, you've answered this question before, but we'll ask it again just in case you've any new twists on it as you're a couple more books down the road. Rainer, where do you think the capital market revolution goes next?
I read a very interesting book. I don't know what you think about it, but I never thought about it. The book was, the title was Space Economy, and another book, Space Capital. And I didn't know that in the last 10 years, almost $300 billion were invested in the space economy. And I never knew so much about it. Now I bought 20 books about this space economy. And I think it will be also a big topic for the capital markets. Unfortunately, you can't buy shares from Elon Musk or SpaceX companies, but there are a lot of others. And I think this is something maybe as important as artificial intelligence, where everyone's talking about it, but there are not so many people talking about this. And I wrote an article a few weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal. It was about, I reminded people for speech that Ronald Reagan had exactly 40 years ago. And he predicted the future is of free enterprise. It's also in the space. And we thought always that's something that only governments can do. And of course, for decades, it was a race between the Soviet Union and the United States. And it was all by governments. But today, it's by private companies. And, people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk or Richard Branson, but these are only a few. There are a lot of others. And I started to read about it, and it's so fascinating about the space economy. I think today it's not a big topic at the stock exchanges, but my feeling is in the next 10 years, it will become a big, big story.
I think that's absolutely a brilliant and perfect moment to end on, because actually, watch this space. Mr. and Mrs. Young were in the City of London in Mansion House last year, where there was one of the many confidential private briefings taking place in the Guildhall, actually, to be precise. And that was, in fact, a meeting about financial centres for funding the space economy. And I do believe Mrs. Young is assiduously at work on a conference to that effect, which will be taking place in London in a month or two's time, Reiner. So I think you're spot on. I think it's a huge opportunity, the space economy. Really, really interesting. So we've gone all the way to infinity and beyond today, as we've been looking at all of these sorts of issues of unbreakable spirit. And my goodness, wasn't that an unbreakable spirit that first put man on the moon and man in orbit and so on in the course of the analog era? Reiner Zitelmann, thank you very, very much for being with us for a third time. I'd really love to get together again and talk about the power of capitalism, and more importantly, I think, how nations escape poverty, because that looks like a fascinating tome altogether. I'm looking forward to reading that one myself. Let me just say, ladies and gentlemen, next week we've got another very, very exciting guest. We're going to have Olivia Cooper. She's going to be discussing the mystery of international business, structuring for global assets. She's an expert in how to structure assets across the world, and we're really looking forward to having Olivia. She's a very, very lively, bubbly figure altogether in the world of asset management and indeed the structuring of assets for high net worth individuals, corporations, and so on. So that's going to be our show next week. For today, let me just say a huge word of thanks to those who engaged with the show today, particularly Anne Berg and Beate Young. Lovely to have a brace of wonderful and accomplished women talking to us as we kick off Women's History Month this month. Let me also say thank you to our fabulous production team, Fernando Rushelen and Marianne. And actually, I'd like to finish by saying happy birthday, Marianne, for Thursday. Ladies and gentlemen, that's your show together. We've had the incredible Reiner Zitelmann talking to us for the third time. I foresee in the future, call it my masculine intuition, a fourth appearance on this show. My name is Patrick L. Young. We have been talking about Unbreakable Spirit. Have a great week in life and markets. We'll see you next week on IPO-VID. Thanks for watching.